Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Friday, December the 24th, 2021. And a happy Christmas to you all. And I'd like to thank everyone who has been so generous and gracious as to donate to the live stream. I have some good news for you. A tranche from my father's estate was finally delivered to me. So that means I, for a little while anyway, will not have to worry about imminent homelessness. But once again, thank you so very much, and God bless everyone who contributed to the KMG show this year. And hello to Jim Smith, who says, I'm a little concerned about tonight's show title. Most of the time people say they're winning. I think they're actually losing. Hello to Emmett Kelly's Earth and Run. Dan, Jim Smith, Chogokin 666. Tim Humphrey says, yes, a Christmas miracle. Hello to Palpcasso 88 and Dawn from Beyond. And let's see, what are we going to start off with? Well, yes, I said that we're winning. The COVID-19 narrative has collapsed, absolutely collapsed. There are a lot of panic porn merchants out there. Well, most of the elite who want to keep this going, they're going to try. God knows they're going to try. But I think that it's over. It's done. A Christmas message from Eugippius, whose Substack is invaluable. A Merry Christmas and sincere thanks to all of my readers and especially my subscribing supporters. You've granted me an incredible platform, and I hope that I've repaid you by creating a small corner of the internet that is reasonable and rational and committed to getting things right. One of the things I try very hard to do here, Eugippius writes, is to confront even disturbing news with careful analysis and to cultivate a relaxed tone, free of the fear that politicians and the press have been using to manipulate people for months and months now. A lot of people are tired of being afraid, and many more will grow tired of it still. In the coming months, our messages will only grow more attractive. This message takes many forms, but right now, the most appropriate is probably this. It's healthy to have an active social life and to see your friends and relatives as often as possible, especially at Christmas. It's healthy not to worry about what medical procedures others might or might not have had. It's healthy not to worry if somebody has the sniffles, and it's healthy to be unvaccinated. It's healthy to show your face in public. It's healthy to work out with other people at the gym. It's healthy to shake hands with colleagues. It's healthy to stand near people you're talking to. It's healthy to hug close friends. It's healthy to go outside. It's healthy to travel. It's healthy for old people to see their grandchildren. It's not healthy to fear the air you breathe. It's not healthy to fear children. And it's not healthy to hide indoors. Eugippius concludes, we've gone a long way beyond a few temporary public health measures to mitigate the impact of infections. Soon our governments will have hijacked 2 years of our daily existence in service of goals that every day grow more nebulous and unobtainable. We are losing our lives in the hope of saving them, and we have to show other people the way back. And let's see what Alex Berenson has to say. The title of this paper might as well be, Don't Let Your Kids Get the COVID Vaccine. Healthy kids infected with SARS-CoV-2 have few symptoms and extremely strong protection afterwards. Children have powerful and long-lasting immunity to SARS-CoV-2 after being infected, according to a new peer-reviewed paper in a top scientific journal. That would be Nature. Since healthy children almost never suffer serious or even moderate complications from COVID, the paper is yet another strike against pushing COVID vaccines on them. All the 91 elementary school children in the study either had mild or no symptoms, as is typical. Both innate and adaptive immunity, the initial antibody response and the later growth and maturation of T cells that attack SARS-CoV-2 are more powerful in children than in adults, the researchers found. Further, the immune response lasted for essentially the entire period the researchers tracked, a year in the case of some kids. The researchers speculated that kids may have such a strong response, both because of their innate robustness of their immune systems and because they are exposed frequently to other coronaviruses, stimulating cross-immunity among them. The good news did not end there. The response appeared to reach across SARS-CoV-2 variants. These findings augur well for immunity generated in childhood, the researchers wrote. As is nearly always the case in papers that have findings devastating to vaccines or vaccine mandates, the writers did not openly explain the ramifications of what they had discovered, saying only vaguely that they will help to guide vaccine deployment in the pediatric population. But the implications are clear. Huge studies already show that natural immunity is superior to vaccine protection in adults, and this paper shows kids will have even better post-infection immunity. Thus, allowing healthy kids to be infected and recover naturally is likely a far safer route for them than exposing them to mRNA vaccines that have already been proven to cause myocarditis in young people and whose long-term dangers are unknown. Let's see, what else do we have here? The mandatory COVID vaccination battles may get even uglier, especially for kids. This is again from Alex Berenson and his Substack, Unreported Truths. If the last 2 years have proven anything, it's that people in authority hate admitting they've made mistakes, which seems to be one big reason why every bit of data showing that lockdowns or vaccines or masks or whatever don't work is met with, let's just do more of it. And you know what people, especially those members of the self-appointed elite that runs from Brooklyn to San Francisco, hate even more than admitting mistakes? Admitting their mistakes harmed their kids. Cue COVID vaccines. At best, mRNA vaccines are useless for kids, a way to make oldsters feel better, never mind that adult-to-child transmission is far more common than the reverse. We have known since the very beginning of COVID that SARS-CoV-2 is not dangerous to healthy kids and that the pediatric inflammatory syndrome looks a lot like other post-viral disorders, rarely serious and generally easily treatable. Now we know more. We know that the protection the vaccines offer is weak and limited. We know they can cause dangerous heart problems in young people. We know that natural immunity lasts longer and is stronger. And we have just learned that natural immunity in kids is even better. Last month, the elites rushed to vaccinate their children. The vast majority of children 5 to 11 nationally are not vaccinated. But in wealthy school districts on the coasts, you might be forgiven for thinking the reverse is true. Berenson concludes, I will never understand why a supposedly intelligent group of people risk vaccinating their children over a disease that is basically no risk to kids. Now the choice they made looks even worse. Omicron renders vaccines worthless within months, and this week's Nature paper shows the power of natural immunity for kids. The elites have two choices now: admit they stuffed their kids with mRNA for no reason, or try to force the same useless shots on everyone else's children. We've learned over the last 2 years which path they are likely to follow. Are you ready to let them include your kids in their failed experiment? And one more from Alex Berenson, Pandemic of the Vaccinated. This absolutely brutal preprint from Denmark shows zero vaccine effectiveness against Omicron beginning 2 months after so-called peak protection and sharply negative protection 3 months out. In other words, vaccinated people were much more likely to get Omicron beginning about 100 days after the second dose. What about boosters? Well, they did very little, but go get one anyway. Pfizer will thank you. See how the green dot in the chart goes below the black line? Yeah, that's bad. Lucky you, Omicron is a cold, at least per South Africa, for the unvaccinated. And I'll have more on this rather amazing development. Jim Kunstler's column today is called Reindeer Games. You understand, of course, that Western Civ's mass formation psychosis, like a horror movie franchise, requires the constant reinvention of its monsters and hobgoblins and a constantly refreshed arsenal of weapons to defeat them. COVID is our mutating monster, but Big Pharma's silver bullets and wooden stakes have proven quite lame. So the resourceful superhero, Dr. Fauci, aka the Science, has induced his magic messenger, Santa Claus, aka the FDA, to deliver 2 brand new lightsabers to humankind to keep millions of disordered minds churning with hope of slaying the object of their fear. Enter stage right and left Paxlovid from Pfizer, and Molnupiravir from Merck. The names alone sound like mysterious invocations from a druidical rite of redemption. How many times have you muttered Molnupiravir, opening the fridge in hope of finding at least one beer tucked away behind the mayonnaise and miso? Paxlovid, you see, works as a DNA polymerase inhibitor, the same as the drug whose name must not be mentioned on YouTube. Except that, unlike, again, same drug, which is considered about the safest in the world and which won a Nobel Prize for its inventor, Paxlovid is hardly tested at all. It is actually a two-drug treatment requiring the HIV drug ritonavir to give it a buddy boost. The FDA calls it an investigational drug, meaning it is subject to Murphy's Law as the vaccines have proven to be, nor has it passed through any approval process so far. It's being released under the FDA Emergency Use Authorization, which relieves Pfizer of any liability problem if people are harmed by it. Molnupiravir is a nucleoside agonist that is an ersatz component that can be plugged into nucleic acids, both RNA and DNA, so that its availability causes nonsense RNA and DNA to be synthesized, and that in turn mucks up the reproduction of viruses, albeit with risk as well as to mammalian cells, hence its limitation to 5 days of use only. Molnupiravir will cost $700 for a 5-day course of treatment compared to $20 for a course of the drug, which may not be mentioned. The U.S. government bought $2.2 billion worth of Molnupiravir. Pfizer's Paxlovid is actually two-drug treatment requiring the HIV drug ritonavir to give it a buddy boost. The U.S. government bought $5 billion worth of Paxlovid. And so now we can see why U.S. public health officialdom and the non-compos mentis Joe Biden and co. worked so hard, along with social media and cable news, to outlaw all the other cheap and highly effective COVID early treatment drugs on the scene. Not only the drug which must not be mentioned, but fluvoxamine, hydroxychloroquine, and so on. They've even interfered with deliveries of monoclonal antibodies to stifle their use. You can see clearly what a racketeering operation this has been all along between the FDA, the CDC, Dr. Fauci's NIAID, and the pharmaceutical industry. Alas, Kunstler writes, the Omicron variant has turned into the Grinch that is stealing their Christmas. Omicron is so mild an illness that there has been perhaps one death from it in America, and who knows how chronically ill that patient was. They won't say, of course. All week long, as it became increasingly evident Omicron was nothing to get worked up about, the Joe Biden regime went into overdrive, trying to cow the nation into another round of submission and more booster shots. You can infer that this might mean that the end of the COVID-19 pandemic extravaganza that has so benefited the party in power. It has given them free rein to be the only policy the only policy exercise they know, pushing people around. So with Omicron on the scene like an unexpected reality test, the Democrats may be fresh out of monsters to terrify the populace. As the horror movie ends and the screen fades to black, the audience is apt to walk out under that mass formation spell into the winter sunlight, blinking and gasping at their insane ordeal they've been subjected to. It's already happening in a bunch of blue cities whose Democratic bosses have discovered that defunding the police was a shuck and jive they now have to answer for. This Christmas Eve, we can't omit great thanks to some of the other brave medical researchers and doctors across the country who have sacrificed livelihoods to fight both for the people's health and against the torrents of bad faith and dishonesty spewed out against the people of this land by their own government and its propaganda legions. Kudos to Dr. Robert Malone, Dr. Peter McCullough, Dr. Pierre Corey, Dr. Scott Atlas, Dr. Chris Martenson, Dr. David Martin, Dr. Steve Kirsch, Dr. Brett Weinstein, Dale Bigtree, Alex Berenson, Joe Rogan, Tucker Carlson, Glenn Greenwald, and many, many others who are standing up against tyranny and coercion. So what's this you say about Omicron being a pandemic of the vaccinated? Well, on the show yesterday, I noted that CP24, which is been my go-to source for the latest on who is getting infected in the province of Ontario, had decided no longer to provide that information, or rather, no longer to break it down based on vaccination status. Perhaps they, I don't know, perhaps I did some good here, because when I checked CP24 today, they were back to giving us useful data. This is from Chris Herholt. Ontario reported 9,571 new COVID-19 cases and 6 net new deaths Friday, shattering all previous records for infection, while multiple officials conceded the province's testing system can no longer keep up with and track the spread of infection. The 7-day rolling average of new cases now stands at 4,923, up from 4,001 yesterday and 1,914 1 week ago. The Ministry of Health said that of the new cases announced Friday, 254 people involved people with unknown vaccination status, 356 involved partially vaccinated people, 1,536 involved unvaccinated people, and 7,425 involved fully vaccinated people. And that is almost 80%. It's like 78, 79%. How about that, huh? How about that? How's it working out in Alberta? 80.9% of the new cases of COVID-19 in Alberta were detected amongst those who are fully vaccinated. And of course, a not insignificant number of that 80.9% will have had the third jab, the so-called booster. The CBC is not as forthcoming as the Canadian press in giving us the goods. Their story, Ontario reports record high 9,571 COVID-19 cases on Christmas Eve, does not include data about who is getting it, their vaccination status. Ontario, Manitoba, New Brunswick, and Prince Edward Island report new record high COVID-19 case numbers. You see, going back last year, people on our side have been saying, look, if you test more people, you're going to get higher case numbers. Case numbers in and of themselves are not particularly useful. The numbers of people in hospital, the numbers of people in ICUs, they are useful. Case numbers, not so much. But the other side, the side with the narrative, decided to boost the case numbers in order to terrify people. Now that it turns out that Omicron is basically a cold for the overwhelming majority of people, the narrative people, they're saying, oh, yes, it's because of testing, all this testing. Well, of course, it's always been about all this testing. A strange story from Emily Paling at the CBC. Omicron's prevalence should shake off COVID-19's lingering stigma, experts say. What stigma? Well, you mean like the stigma of mental illness, the stigma of venereal disease? Is that what you're talking about? There is still a stigma related to judging people and what they did, said woman who caught virus. Oh, so now we've gone to, oh my God, this virus is unstoppable, to, let's just stop hurting people and guessing, how they got this virus. Alexandra Floyd said her friends and coworkers were generally understanding when she called and texted them to say she had tested positive for COVID-19, but still, she worried about being judged. If you're worried about more about being judged than actually being sickened, there's something wrong. I think there's definitely that stigma related to, well, where were you? Who were you with the last couple of days? What did you do? Who are you around? Who did you expose? She told the CBC. I understand those questions need to be asked for sure, but I definitely think that there is still that stigma related to judging people and what they did. The 29-year-old Toronto law clerk said that she was shocked that she contracted the virus and found it ironic given how careful she's been. She says she's double vaccinated. Floyd believes she was exposed at a restaurant on December 10th and started to feel symptoms which she said were similar to a bad cold on December the 14th. Well, how would she have any idea that she picked this up at a restaurant December 10th? Was she locked in her apartment, weeks before and then after? She never went anywhere else. She was never in any proximity to anyone. Anyway, Alexander Floyd happened to have a rapid test at home and tested positive the morning of December 15th while waiting 3 days for the results of a PCR test, which confirmed she had COVID-19 and specifically the Omicron variant. Floyd contracted the friends and coworkers she's seen the week before. It's just important to be compassionate because no matter what you do, no matter how careful you are, this is extremely contagious, especially Omicron, and it's really hard to judge. Oh, I see. So we've gone from everyone get vaccinated, double vaccinated, and then you won't need to worry about getting COVID, to, I don't know, everyone's going to get it, but keep getting the jabs, keep getting more and more jabs. My gauge of panic porn has been Bruce Arthur of the Toronto Star and his Twitter feed. Oh, yes, caring about LeBron James. Yes, another sports ball addict, terrified of COVID-19. There is a retweet from someone called Robi Bhattacharya. Multiple studies this week on relative severity of Omni versus Delta. In my opinion, the Imperial College report best distinguished intrinsic severity from prior immunity. Oh, Imperial College. We're still taking them seriously? Why? So Bruce Arthur retweeted a tweet from Howard Foreman, who is an MD, MBA professor at Yale, rainbow flag, and share of the population fully vaccinated against COVID. Okay, we have Denmark at the highest, then the United Kingdom, then Israel, then the United States, and South Africa below 30%. This doesn't mean anything. But Bruce Arthur concludes, the best news in all of this is the same, really, that vaccines work. And the bad news is probably still the same, too, that not everyone is vaccinated. Yeah, well, Bruce Arthur lives in Toronto, and if he's been following the data, it doesn't make any difference. In fact, we've moved into negative efficacy territory. Timothy Caulfield, who is a medical professor in Alberta, he was absolutely infuriated by the tweet by the aforementioned Dr. Pierre Corey. He tweeted, I feel bad for the docs. Most don't fail at COVID RX intentionally. They are simply casualties of the pharmaganda war on repurposed drugs, steadfast faith in corrupt guidance from captured agencies. Advice, read more before going on CNN or in the ICU. So Caulfield has put a big red arrow, misinformation menace. And then he whines above, how is Corey still on Twitter? His feed is full of truly harmful misinformation. This kind of BS from Corey invites the abuse of healthcare providers. MDs who don't provide unproven therapies, e.g. the drug which may not be named, are following the science and their legal and ethical obligations. I responded to him. Canada's most famous Bryan Singer lookalike has a Christmas message. No quarter for heretics. Jab, jab, and jab some more. Negative efficacy? What's that? Look at the latest COVID-19 fully vaccinated case numbers from Ontario, 77.6%, and Alberta, 80.9%. It's past, the sun has gone down, so the Advent season is over. I'll be right back. Back again. Let's take a look at the chat. Caulfield has many government grants, says Dan. Brandon Smith says, anytime your 6-foot bubble is encroached upon, some pungent flatulence can help reclaim it. Hello to Don Willis and Oscar Toe. Scored the eggnog? No, it's this. Diluted 50-50 with mineral water. Can you see it? Tio Pepe, Uncle Pepe. The official drink of the alternative right, or so it seems to me, or should be. Thank you for your kind words, Palcasso88. Chronic, okay, I'm not going to repeat that. Don Wallace says, I see Trump as the vehicle. He may be a rusted, high-mileage Pinto Vega, but we could not have gotten here more alert populace without him. I think that is true. Hello to Tim Humphreys. Texas Feral Hog says they say that Omicron's spike protein more resembles a disco mirror ball than a medieval weapon. I'll have something to say about Trump shortly. Anonymous Conservatives is still saying that maybe Trump is somehow faking them out by pretending to be pro-vax. Yeah, what is this, a 43-degree chess? Yeah, I've seen that. JoeKen666 says, tonight on Mannix, the Omicron dialectic. I don't know, all the shows on MeTV are showing Christmas episodes, and Dragnet had a Christmas episode. And since that show is pretty much unrelievedly grim, and typically you have the good cop, bad cop, right? Well, Sergeant Joe Friday is very much the bad cop, but his partner doesn't seem to be much in the way of a good cop either. So they had a Christmas show about a child that went missing, and Santa Claus got involved, and I suppose Joe Friday actually had to attempt to smile. I only see Massey from Kentucky, I think, says Oscar Toe. So much for the cherished notion that Trump is leading the White Hats to deliver us from this madness and tyranny, says British American. Well, you see, somebody clever whispered something into Joe Biden's ear or put it on his teleprompter that, hey, this disease, this pandemic is tied to your ass now, Joe Biden. And it began under Trump. And, you know, Trump is responsible for the vaccines. So maybe you should start talking about Trump now. And he did. Trump loves the vaccines, and he's taking personal credit for them. And he's not going to back away. He's simply not going to back away too. Edie Wolf, hello, says some speculate Omicron might be artificial too because of the high degree of mutation. Yeah, this was Eugipius's opinion. Some are even speculating that, well, it could have been released accidentally, but you know, since the symptoms are so mild and so many people are asymptomatic, the idea was this was going to cross out the or push out the Delta and Alpha variants. Reindeer Games is a fun movie, says Tim Humphreys. Really? I think that was John Frankenheimer's last film. It struck me as really, really ugly. Really, really, really ugly. Just, my word, such nastiness. British American says Merry or Happy Christmas, everyone. Hello to, what is this? Jada Vion Clown World. Hello. Scott Naring says, Kevin, I can't thank you enough for all that you have done for me and mine these past few years. Merry Christmas to you, sir. I raise a pint to you. May God bless you. Why, thank you. Too kind. Too kind. CDC was saying by this time thousands would be succumbing to Ami, says Oscar Toe. Hello to Max Vitriol. Says, glad you got some money, KMG. I had to administer an estate. One seems rather responsible to not pay all the heirs at once and as soon as possible. Well, this has to do with paperwork that the government demands, the federal government demands, and I'm not going to make any more comments on that. Just let's say that the paperwork was delayed. Hello to David Wright, who wishes us a frohe Weihnachten. Why, thank you. And imagine a world where police and... Okay, I'm not going to repeat that. Hello to France. And some other names here. Oh, Mr. Chuck the Buck Norris. Hello from Ottawa. And let's scroll down to the bottom. Pelcasco88 says Charlize Theron only did reindeer games because she wanted to work with Frankenheimer. She said it's her worst movie. What, Frankenheimer did not get along with Ben Affleck or some such thing? Lieutenant Dan was in Reindeer Games. His over-the-top performance was pretty funny to me, says Tim Humphreys. Brendan Smith says once they go sideways, they'll get the media labeled Trump vaccine. That would be very difficult. That would be very difficult indeed, because Biden until this week, Trump, what did Trump have to do with the vaccine? This is my vaccine, and everyone should get it once, twice, 3 times a lady. Okay, let's get back to it here. Canada's most famous Bryan Singer lookalike. Yes. Oh, I think it was David Pinson who pointed to my use of the phrase sanitary dictatorship. Well, credit where due, I did not coin this phrase. It was coined last year, rather early last year, by Bishop Athanasius Schneider, who is the auxiliary bishop of Astana in Kazakhstan. Very interesting story. I'll read from Wikipedia. Anton Schneider was born in Tomak, Kyrgyz SSR in the Soviet Union. According to his account, his parents were Black Sea Germans, ethnic German settlers who lived along the north coast of the Black Sea in the Russian Empire, who at the end of World War II were evacuated to Berlin, whence they were deported and exiled by the USSR regime to a labor camp in Krasno camps in the Ural Mountains. His family was closely involved with the underground church. Schneider's mother, Mariah, was one of several women to shelter the Blessed Oleksa Zyrikchi, a Ukrainian priest later imprisoned at the infamous Karlag and in 1963 martyred by the Soviet regime for his ministry. The family relocated to the Kyrgyz SSR after being released from the camps, then left Central Asia for Estonia. As a boy, Schneider and his 3 siblings would attend clandestine masses with their parents, often traveling 60 miles from the family's home in Valga to Tartu, taking the first train in the morning under cover of darkness and returning with the last train at night. Due to the great distance, infrequent visits by the clergy, and crackdowns by the Soviet authorities, they were able to make the trip only once a month. In 1973, shortly after making his first Holy Communion in secret, Schneider emigrated with his parents to Rottweil in West Germany. So yes, Bishop Athanasius Schneider coined the term sanitary dictatorship. And, Joe Biden being confused. I think I'll get to that one a little later. And we've already talked about Eugippius, Alex Berenson. Oh, here's some interesting news. And of course, I've been saying this for a long, long time, and many other people have been saying it for a long time. But here it is from Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. New figures out of England show that 65% of people described as COVID patients only tested positive for COVID after being admitted to hospital for something else. Citing official government statistics, the numbers are contained in a report by the Daily Mail's senior health reporter. Well, yes. So what this means is that if you have a heart attack and are admitted to the hospital or to ICU, and they test you for COVID, and you're positive for COVID, then you are a COVID patient, not a heart attack patient. So, this makes it obvious that the numbers that we've been given, both for cases Hospital admissions and deaths are wildly overstated. In London, where concerns about a spike in hospitalizations caused by Omicron are being cited as justification for more restrictions, the number is even higher, with 70% of COVID hospitalizations diagnosed after the patient had already been admitted for other ailments. The numbers once again emphasize how COVID numbers are vastly inflated, not only for cases, but also in terms of death, where many people suffering numerous more serious comorbidities die with, not from, COVID, but are counted as COVID deaths anyway. A significant number of these people also catch COVID inside the hospital from other patients and staff. As Alison Pearson recently noted, a positive test 8 days after admission means the hospital basically gave the patient COVID. This journalist also revealed how only 5% of hospital beds are currently occupied by COVID patients in England, and that overall hospital occupancy currently stands at 89%, which is a decent figure for the NHS in winter. Oh, here's something else. In terms of so-called unvaccinated getting infected with COVID, do you know that you get your jab and then you're not counted as vaccinated until 2 weeks later? Why? Because in that 2-week period, you are like a magnet for infection. Yeah, that's how it works. And that's why they put that 2-week gap in there. And let's go to Lockdown Skeptics, or dailyskeptic.org as it's known now. Vaccine effectiveness drops to minus 75% in 18 to 29-year-olds as Omicron slices through vaccine protection and booster effect starts to wear off. Minus 75%. You are a third less likely to catch COVID this Christmas than last Christmas and 80% less likely to die from it. So why the panic? A good question. Dr. Jenny Harries, the head of the UK Health Security Agency, has said that although the Omicron variant appears to be milder than the Delta strain, New Year's Eve's festivities could still be banned in an attempt to curb its spread, citing her concern that an influx of positive COVID tests is leading to staff shortages. And Dr. Harries is shown behind a podium which says, "Stay home, protect the NHS, save lives." Once again, for the nth time, the purpose of NHS is to protect Britons. It is not the purpose of Britons to protect the NHS. Patrick Vallence's defense of SAGE modeling fails to convince. Really? They're just going to keep doing this, huh? Chief Scientific Advisor Sir Patrick Vallance has come to the defense of SAGE and its modeling after some torrid headlines this week, following a Twitter exchange between lead modeler Professor Graham Medley and Spectator editor Fraser Nelson, in which Professor Medley revealed that SAGE had not been asked to model less disastrous scenarios. Writing in the Times, Dr. Vallance appeared directly to contradict some of the statements made by Professor Medley, leaving observers baffled as to which of the two is correct, as it is unclear how both can be. Dr. Vallance claimed that modeling of other less severe scenarios had been done and presented to government, while Professor Medley said it had not, at least by his team at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Boris Johnson says getting boosted follows the teachings of Christ. Repeating the same message projected by the Archbishop of Canterbury, Boris Johnson has tried to persuade members of the public to get their booster shots by telling them that doing so upholds the Christian principle of loving our neighbor. Further saying, that's what Jesus told us to do. It's Christmas. Do what he said. You know this already, but it's a favorite rhetorical trick of liberal left-wing modernist Christians to say, oh, well, Jesus never condemned this explicitly. Jesus never condemned that explicitly. Oh, but now apparently somewhere in the Gospels, Jesus is telling people to get booster shots. Yeah. Let's see. Johnson was baptized a Catholic, but has rarely discussed his own religion. He married his wife, Carrie, at the Catholic Westminster Cathedral earlier this year. When ITV's Robert Peston asked if he were a practicing Catholic, Johnson replied, "I don't discuss these deep issues." Yes, but go ahead and pretty much order us to get booster shots because that's what Jesus demanded. Again, the question of how twice divorced Boris Johnson, who, as far as anyone knows, is not a Catholic, managed to get married at Westminster Cathedral, which is that is the premier church in England. This is a very interesting question. I don't suppose it will ever be answered. Okay, let's talk about Trump. This is from Alex Griffin at Mediaite. Controversial cartoonist Ben Garrison's latest offering takes aim at former President Trump, who once invited him to the White House for a social media summit. Garrison's cartoon shows a distraught Trump riding in the back of the big Pharma vaccine bandwagon through a crowd of booing onlookers wearing what appear to be MAGA hats. In the cartoon, Trump is making a pained face while an exclamation and question mark ring next to his ear. The cartoon appears to be a reaction to Trump's recent statements supporting the COVID-19 vaccinations. Trump grabbed attention earlier in the week when he announced that he had received his booster shot. He doubled down later in the week in an interview with Candace Owens, saying the vaccines are keeping people from dying. The vaccine is one of the greatest achievements of mankind, Trump added. Garrison is a fierce critic of the COVID-19 vaccines and made headlines in September for treating his severe case of the virus with beet juice and the drug which may not be mentioned. Oh, which is described here as an anti-parasite drug often prescribed for livestock. It's an anti-parasitical drug, which is widely used, by humans in Africa and in Asia. And in fact, the developers of the drug, which must not be mentioned, received a Nobel Prize for it. In 2019, Trump raised eyebrows by inviting Garrison to the White House. Garrison, a longtime supporter of Trump, at least before this latest cartoon, had elicited accusations of anti-Semitism for depicting Jews as puppet masters. Okay. Yeah. Can't criticize that George Soros. He is untouchable. Untouchable. Let's go back to the chat. And here we go. Hello to Justin Proto, KMG. I hope you have a very Merry Christmas. You and your show are true inspiration. Despite the distance and lack of really knowing us, you do give hope and hope to all. Merry Christmas. Well, thank you so much. I have the information sheet they gave her, quite comprehensive, good to follow to ward off all infections, says David Wright. What that's... Emmett Colley-Zura says, whatever happened to not giving public scandal? Read Bojo's marriage at Westminster Cathedral. Hello to Teleologic Jones, who says, yes, Jesus jabs me. Texas Feral Hog says, there should be an information sheet they give the vaccinated to take with them. Anran says, did Jesus say anything about Pornhub? I don't think so. David Rice says, a friend forced to get vaxxed asked her doctor how to protect herself, gave a long list of supplements to take, including massive vitamin C and D. Yes, Oscar Toe points out that Jesus never said it was wrong to be trans. Anrun makes a joke, the man who jabbed Sage Valance. They don't tell most people to be careful during that 2-week period. WTF, says Texas Feral Hog. Professor Paul, hello. Kakva Parzhavaitye. It is a regular format show today. Thought it was going to be a general chat, not complaining mind. Yeah, I kind of chickened out on that because I didn't know whether it could be sustained, for 2 hours. To Live and Die in LA takes place during Christmas, New Year's, says Palcasso 88. Yes, everyone is talking about Christmas adjacent movies now. And there was one that came to mind to me just yesterday, today, one of my favorite movies, and now I've lost it. Texas Feral Hog says, I think I have horseworms. Vanilla Gorilla says, I got an info sheet when I got vaccinated. Choke against 666 says, Jesus is a vaxxerith. That's good. I like that. Let's talk about Ted Byfield, who died yesterday at the age of 93. I knew Ted for quite a few years, and I worked for him and his company, for 9 years. He was born in 1928 and died in 2021. You know, Ted Byfield had a collection of his columns. What was it, like 25 years ago, something like that? And it was called, he described himself as a redneck, okay? And yes, the Book of Ted, Epistles from an Unrepentant Redneck. Ted Byfield, not a redneck. Well, one of his grandfathers was mayor of Toronto, okay? Also, he was raised Unitarian. Unitarians are not typically associated with being rednecks. And he later became an Anglican, also very few rednecks there, and later became a Russian Orthodox. Now, I'm sure there's lots of, Russian Orthodox rednecks, but not too many in North America. Ted got into the business very early. At the age of 18, he was a copy boy for the Washington Post. And he lived in Washington for a while. So there's an American branch of the Byfield family. I've met some of them. Many Canadian families have American branches. He worked at the Ottawa Journal and the Timmins Daily Press, and that's where he met Virginia Byfield. He later worked at the Winnipeg Free Press. And yes, Wikipedia says in 1952, Ted underwent a profound religious conversion inspired by the writings of Christian apologists such as Dorothy L. Sayers, C.S. Lewis, and G.K. Chesterton. The couple committed to living their faith fully. Ted had this belief that if people would hear, and I saw some of this, people would be invited to his house, or I'd be at his house and I'd see, a door, and I'd hear someone speaking, and they were reading from Dorothy L. Sayers or C.S. Lewis. And Ted had this strange belief, that if people were exposed to enough Dorothy L. Sayers or C.S. Lewis, then they would recognize, the truth of Christianity. It doesn't exactly work like that, actually. Ted founded his own school, originally affiliated with the Anglican Church, called the St. John's School. There were several of them. There was one outside Edmonton. There was one in Ontario. And the one in Ontario was associated with, a disaster, actually. In 1978, 12 children and one volunteer died of hypothermia after their canoes capsized in Lake Timiskaming. Yeah. Ted was a schoolmaster. And I remember asking him once at some company party, I said, what did you do? And, corporal punishment was doled out frequently. I asked him, what did you do when you came across a boy that you couldn't break? Because everyone knows in these private schools, in the public schools in England, where beatings are common, there's some boys who just take the attitude it's only pain. You're going to get over it, and they're not going to break me. And Ted said, I never had such a boy. And I thought, really? Really, Ted? Anyway, Alberta Report magazine grew out of this kind of how would I say, almost a communist-like organization, which had been started by the Byfields, where people, living in common, and the Company of the Cross, it was called. They were paid $1. They paid $1 a day, I believe. But the St. John's Edmonton Report started in 1973, and then it became Alberta Report, and later there was BC Report and Western Report, which was the version of the magazine that was sold in, well, let's say from east of the Alberta border. And this was a news magazine. It was not, an opinion journal, although there were, there were op-ed columns in it. Ted was a newsman, and Ted wanted the news covered. It was based actually on Time magazine, and in fact, the layout of the cover in the early years so greatly resembled the Time magazine cover that there was legal threats were made, and so the cover style had to be changed. So I started working. Well, let's say I had been reading Alberta Report, Western Report, BC Report from the 80s. And so I moved to Edmonton in early 1992 to work at CJCA radio station, where Peter Weisbach was my boss, and I produced the show. Actually, I was executive producer for the station, and he was the program manager for the station. It was an all-talk station. And so Peter Weisbach was new to Alberta, and so he took to reading Alberta Report, and we started inviting the reporter who'd written the cover story for the latest issue onto the show every week. And Peter Weisbach decided that they seemed to be variable, and so Lorne Gunter, it was decided that Lorne Gunter was going to be the representative from Alberta Report on every show. And I hope I, can say that I gave Lorne Gunter a little leg up there. Similarly, I was the person who recommended him for an open column spot at the Edmonton Sun, which within a year he had translated this into being hired by the Edmonton Journal, a much more successful newspaper. Later, he became part of the editorial board of the National Post before going back to the Sun newspaper chain a few years ago. And he's still at it. Lorne Gunter, he was a telemarketer at Alberta Report before he started working as a writer. And at one point, at a particular thin period in the magazine in terms of talent, he was writing about 60% of the magazine. Alberta Report, there were no kill fees. Alberta Report. If a story was handed in which was thought not up to snuff, either in terms of editorial stance, and the stance of the magazine was imprinted on all the stories, or simply because it was technically incompetent, well, it would be rewritten by an editor. The magazine was heavily rewritten, and at one point I was one of the people who was heavily rewriting it. By the time that so when I was with CJCA, Alberta Report did a cover story on the new regime, and I was interviewed extensively. And when the radio station was shut down in December of 1993, Alberta Report, I got a call, hey, how would you like to, try writing for us? And so they assigned me a story, and I was unfamiliar with writing for magazines. I'd written a lot of editorial stuff, but it is not the same. And over the years, after I became ensconced there, we had a lot of difficulty dealing with people who were used to writing op-eds. And no, a news story is not written like an op-ed. And a lot of these people would just write op-eds, and they would have to be rewritten. And you do this often enough at Alberta Report. If you did it, you weren't writing for them anymore. It was really kind of sink or swim experience. Anyway, I wrote a freelance story for them, and I thought that I'd done a terrible job. It got printed because everything got printed, and I kind of slunk away. I don't even know whether it was printed under my name, I think I may have been too ashamed. But anyway, a little while later, I thought, okay, let's give this another go. And I started doing regular freelance work for them. And then I started doing regular copy editing for them. And then one day, Link Byfield, the son of Ted, who became editor and publisher, he said to me, he called me into his office and said, "Do you know a lot about computers?" Yeah, sure. I knew Microsoft, DOS 5, whatever, Microsoft Word. And basically, he was asking me, did I think that I could be in charge of the layout and production of the magazine? And I learned a long time ago that if people ask you that, say yes. Say yes. And I said yes. And the first weekend that I was in charge of the production of the magazine, it was an absolute nightmare. It's just one of those situations where I have to go to sleep. I have to go to sleep. No, you can't go to sleep because, you've been up for, I don't know, 30 hours or whatever. You can't go to sleep because it's not done yet. But anyway, I got better and better at it. And, but I wasn't on the staff. I was paid as a freelancer. Then I went away to San Diego to work for Peter Weisbach again. But then I thought, various problems with San Diego. They weren't paying me enough for a start. And then I got an offer from Alberta Report to be, full-time employee, to be an editor there. And so I took that job. And I was in charge of production again for a couple of years, where Paul Bunner very kindly took me off production because the thing about being in charge of production, well, I was writing stories and still editing. And it got Monday off, but had to work often late into Sunday morning, sleeping there at the magazine, that it drove people crazy. Two before me, the fellow, not one, but two before me, he started coming to work wearing military fatigues and packing a pistol. And the fellow directly before me, he would drink whiskey openly on the job, And so then I just went to writing and editing, and I worked there until I was fired. In 2003. And Ted Byfield was always very kind to me. I remember before I started working for the magazine, I was on the phone with him. I forget why. And I was talking something up, and he called me a little while later, and he said, "Look, I've written my weekly column for this week, and I was impressed by some of the things you said, so I want to put them in my column, but I'm going to attribute them to you." And I thought, well, that's very flattering, because a lot of people, probably most people in the business, wouldn't do that. They would just take someone else's ideas and run with it. And I thought, yeah, this is not going to sit well with my boss, because Peter Weisbach, he thought, it's not on, say, for me to have a reputation of my own, because he was the genius, on the radio. Once at one of his parties, his famous Boxing Day parties, Ted introduced me to people, saying, "This is the man behind the man," Peter Weisbach. And so people would say, "Oh, but what's he really like?" And I said, "Well, you heard him on the radio, and he is exactly like that." And then they said, "No, what's he really like?" So I gave up, Ted, described as irascible. I suppose that's the word that you'd hear about him over and over again. He was always nothing but kind to me and very hospitable, inviting me to his house frequently. His famous Boxing Day parties, there was a picture of me that appeared in Saturday Night Magazine with Paul Bunner and a couple of other people were hoisting trays of food. These were very elaborate parties with hundreds of guests and a procession, of the food. What was it, a hog's head or something like that? And various trays, and we all got roped in. And yeah, most of the time I couldn't go because I had to work over Boxing Day for the magazine. But one year I finally got to go, and it was a fascinating experience. It It really was. I mean, all sorts of people came, Ted knew lots and lots of different people. It was Ted's very strong belief that the journalists that he would prefer to hire at Alberta Report were not journalists. He would find conservatives and turn them into journalists. And that didn't work so well. That Ted was always coming up with these proteges or saying, oh, yeah, I'll get you a job. I'll get you a tryout at the magazine, right? And frequently, a lot of these people were absolutely appalled when they, visited the Alberta Report newsroom, because it was like a typical newsroom with a bunch of like really sweary people, a bunch of slovenly, sweary people. And I just know that a lot of these people who had, come from Ted's church or whatever, or from his social circle, I know that, does Mr. Byfield know this is going on? Does Mr. Byfield know they're using those words in his office? Ted was, by the time I started working for the magazine, Ted had stepped back. He was the chairman of United Western Communications, but his son was in charge, although we'd see him all the time. And occasionally he'd decide that, well, no, the cover story this week has to be about this. It's funny, whenever I visited at Ted's house, there always seemed to be something going on, some sort of project. I remember once I showed up, and I guess it was a summer afternoon, Sunday afternoon, and I got roped into, Ted decided that he was going to have a koi pond in his backyard. So, this had to be dug out and, the earth taken away and all these other things. And I got dragooned into this, right? This was sort of typical at a Byfield get-together. And as I was walking back into the house, I don't know, to wash my hands or something like that, his wife, Virginia, grabbed me by the wrist like this and flipped my hand over. And she looked at my hand and said, soft hands. It's always really amusing to me when I'm confronted with, that level of rudeness. I always think it's comical. What I wanted to say but didn't was, you know what I do for a living, right? But the last few years working for Alberta Report, they were not pleasant at all, because it became clear that there was a move to fire, or to get me to quit, to make life so miserable for me that I would quit. Well, I wasn't going to do that because I had 3 children and their mother to support. And just things got worse and worse and worse. And I had attributed this to Link's brother, Mike, who finally in 2003 got to be the editor. I mean, he was the Fredo of the Byfield family. He was the oldest brother, but he'd never been trusted with that much responsibility, quite rightly so. And he's a very strange man. He once called me up at home, and he would talk interminably. He would talk for hours on the phone, and I learned to just say, yeah, and, go keep doing my work. But he called me up at home. He got me out of bed. And, he starts talking in this rambling way of his. And at the 3/4 of an hour mark, I find myself listening to someone shouting at me, tell me you love the Chinese. Tell me you love the Chinese. I'm not going to jump through hoops for you, Mike. But later I found my real enemy at Alberta Report, it wasn't so much Mike, it was Virginia. It was Virginia Byfield. And it turns out that she had hated me from the very beginning. But as I said, Ted was nothing but kind to me. Let's see. There's a lot of on the internet about the death of Ted, and I'm going to look into some of it. Joseph Breen, strange choice, writing his obit at the National Post. Joseph Breen is distinguished at the National Post for having a, let's say, a horror with a disgust reflex with regard to free speech. Alberta lefty David Klimenhaga has an obit. Talented rhetorician and paleoconservative activist Ted Byfield, dead at 93. He was a talented rhetorician and prominent influencer of the Harper Manning Kenny axis of paleoconservatism, and by inevitable extension of Canadian journalism. Neither Stephen Harper, nor Preston Manning, nor Jason Kenney are paleoconservatives. People on the left, people on the right, we know a lot about the left. People on the left, they know very little about the right. And I believe that the word neoliberalism appears. Yes, it does. Byfield founded the weekly Alberta-based magazine in 1979. It was never a financial success. Yeah, I don't think you could say that. Folding in 2003, but it was a journalistic tour de force, not to mention an incubator for the generation of far-right journalists, including Ezra Levant, Lauren Gunter, Colby Kosh, and Paul Bunner, who've been enormously influential, turning Canadian media into the propaganda wing of modern neoliberalism that it is today. Alberta Report was never neoliberal. I'd have to say that Link Byfield was quite hostile to neoliberalism, and I was quite hostile to neoliberalism. And, no. Oh, I forgot to mention this about Ted, that my demise at the magazine began with this spat with Ezra Levant. And Ezra Levant had written a piece. Well, I'm not going to say that Kevin Michael Grace is an anti-Semite, but, and then he goes into, exhaustive detail. I'd written a piece on kosher food, which later resulted in an extraordinary attack on me by the Jewish Forward in New York City, who trotted out a bunch of rabbis and such like to apparently make the claim that I don't know, that I was wickeder than David Duke, but perhaps not as wicked as Dr. Mengele. So the second in command at Conrad Black's company got involved. Ezra Levant involved him, and later his daughter got involved. She was the reporter from the Forward who wrote a hit piece on me. And so I received this extraordinary request I was on deadline writing a cover story, but I received this extraordinary request to furnish all of the nice things I've said about Jews over the last 5 years, which I did. And then I got another phone call from Ted saying, no, that's, I meant during the last 18 months. Okay. Which I did. And to Ted's great credit, he told this very powerful person who was attempting to, destroy me, that no, he said, I don't think that Kevin Grace is an anti-Semite. Had always prided himself on good relations with the Jews. And no, but it's just a very, very strange situation. But I will always be thankful to Ted for sticking up with for me the way he did. Link Byfield, not so stalwart, I have to say. Not so stalwart. But Ted, let's see. Let's go back to this albertapolitics.ca obit. While his politics were at times abhorrent, the way he pursued them through his journalism was worthy of admiration. Yes, and the usual list gets trotted out, including Ezra Levant, Lauren Gunter, Colby Kosh, and Paul Bunner. There are many, many others. My name used to be included on that list before I was blackballed. Among the many bees in Byfield's bonnet over the years were women's reproductive rights, or abortion, as most sane people call it, feminism generally, newfangled ideas about how to teach arithmetic, and gay-straight alliances, which he dubbed school sex clubs. Where's the lie? Where is the lie? And there's an extraordinary amount of vituperation about Ted on the internet now. Oh, homophobic, etc., 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 misogynist, etc., etc., etc. Let's see. Chris Champion, who I work with at Alberta Report, and now edits the Dorchester Review, in which I've appeared, says, R.I.P. the great man. I lived at his house for several months in 1994 when starting out at Alberta Report magazine, and much admired his generosity, vision, energy, and good humor. Yes. Yes, indeed. You know, Ted was famed for having a really severe temper. But I guess after he stopped taking day-to-day control of the magazine, I mean, I never saw it. I mean, apparently once he threw a typewriter through a plate glass window at Alberta Report. His son, Link, is one of the most furious men that I have ever known. A copy for the magazine was faxed to him, by me, or he got, directly from the not compositor, but, from Dave. And if he didn't like certain things, it would be sent back by fax, and it would be covered with this furious, profane scrawls, right? Just astonishing. Once I sent him the book pages of the magazine, and he responded just to these furious scribblings, like, what the F is this shit? This sort of thing. And so, look, I called him up and I said, look, I can explain what happened, okay? Your mother, that is to say, Virginia, she came to see me and she said for this issue only, she wanted a different layout than the traditional layout. And Link paused and said, yeah, she never had any taste. Only there was a expletive deleted in there. Of course, Mike Byfield, as previously noticed, had a furious temper as well. But that's the thing about working for a family enterprise, that considerations of family take first place. They always take first place. There is it's so depressing in the 90s. I used to think Klein is bad, but at least not Alberta Report bad. And now here we are. So I don't know what they're talking about. All of Ted cared far more about social issues than he cared about economic or political issues. And look, our enemies in Canada, they've won, okay? They've won every battle with our so-called Conservative Party asking, well, how come gays can't give blood? And how come poppers are illegal in Canada? No, they've won. They've won completely, but they're not gracious enough to do a victory lap. A final thing I'll note, when I was writing for Alberta Report, I got invited onto the CBC to write commentaries for them. Yeah. I got invited on CBC News World and other CBC news programs. And if you look at the copy that I was writing, circa, 2000 or whatever, this is the sort of thing that would probably get, me arrested now. That's just how much Canada has changed over the last quarter century. Let's go to the chat. Well, we're talking about Greg Johnson, are we? Okay. David the Gnome says Eggy Wags, which is, of course, is a Clockwork Orange reference. Okay. No, okay. We got a side conversation going on here about Greg Johnson. Oh, something about the definitive Bowden archive, according to Quachalango. Oh, okay. I'd love to have a koi pond, says Kogakin 666. Koi can be really affectionate. Hello to Dionysus. And Henry Ford II, who, of course, stars in Ford versus Ferrari, was pulled over by the police one night when he was chairman, president of the Ford Motor Company. And he was, drunk. And he was in the company of an attractive young woman who was not his wife. And so there was quite a scandal about that. And this then when we learned Henry Ford II's motto, which was never apologize, never explain. Oh, British American. Oh, we're talking about Linda Carter again, huh? Oh, we talking about that South African actress, Charlize Theron? I mean, technically, she's a beautiful woman, but when she's in that Prometheus, and Idris Elba asks her whether she's a robot, I thought, yes, he's saying what we're all thinking. There doesn't seem to be anything behind the eyes there. Dionysus says, I think it is difficult for the left to understand the right because their emotional attachment to their positions, religious in nature, cannot entertain the slightest objection. British American says Karen Carpenter was quite attractive before her health problems set in. Agreed, though not my type. Karen Carpenter, I don't want to talk about Karen Carpenter. That is such a horrifying story. Such a horrifying story. Such a talented woman. And oh dear. Vanilla Gorilla says Uncle Ted is a real conservative. You know, I thought that Link, who died, he had Ted suffered the sorrow of having two of his children die before him. Link and Philippa. I'll say something about Philippa. She was an odd woman, and I knew her, you know, and her husband was employed at the magazine for a while. That didn't work out, but I remember once she had taken to doing something very strange. So I'd be invited to a Byfield, family Sunday dinner, and I'd be there, and there'd be Philippa, and she'd set up a card table just outside the kitchen, with the big dining table. And she would sit there at the dining table where everyone else is seated around the table. And she would be drinking whiskey, chain smoking cigarettes, reading a detective novel, and cackling. Very odd. Very, very odd. Okay, let's see. Anything new at the bottom here? Locksmith. Emma Kelly-Zur said, if you're the last true Canadian, who would you say is the last true Canadian premier or prime minister? Mackenzie King? Yeah, maybe Mackenzie King. He was a liberal, but no, he put Canada first. Music by Simon and Tchaikovsky was a big laugh from the Nutcracker SCTV bit. Forgot to mention that yesterday, says Anne Run. Oh, is lamprey milk in the house? Merry Christmas, Kevin. It's my first Xmas with no family. My aunts and uncles don't want me around because of my status. Oh, I'm very sorry to hear that. Oh, yep, the police are next door. Okay, so I don't want to lose here. I don't want to lose Tainter. Kind of lost the plot there, but now we're going to go back to this. Talking about particular theories of collapse. The archaeological characteristics of sites in this area suggest to those authors an occupation by non-classic Mayan peoples, possibly from the Gulf Coast region. Sabloff, Willie, and Adams have over time modified their ideas about the relationship of this event to the collapse. Sabloff and Willie initially argued that these invaders sent raiding parties throughout the Petun were successful against the Maya because of their superior weapons and caused regional collapse within 100 years of their arrival. More recent statements downplay the invaders' role. R.E.W. Adams assigns to the invaders a supplementary role in the collapse that throughout the lowlands, the news of their presence led to loss of morale and to civil wars. With raiding and local production disasters, collapse ensued. R.W.E. Adams and Bowe studied spatial trends in the cessation of stela, stone monument construction across the lowlands. He does find some west to east trend, the direction of the postulated invasion, but it is only a weak tendency. Writing of the Mesoamerican highlands, Willie ascribes the collapse of the highland city of Teotihuacan to northern barbarians who acculturated to Teotihuacan civilization and then destroyed it. René Milon, who has conducted the major study of the city, notes that the monumental architecture of the Street of the Dead, temples, pyramids, etc., was burned in a ritualistic manner, and that in later Mesoamerican history, such an act signified political subjugation. He suggests that the city center was destroyed by invaders with subsequent local uprising. With support from literary traditions, which significant post-date the 12th century event, the collapse of Tula is often ascribed to invading northern barbarians. Further to the north, the Anasazi abandonment of the Colorado Plateau is sometimes attributed to an early invasion by Athabascan peoples. Similar notions have been advanced regarding the end of Hopewell in the Midwest. In South America, the collapses of the Huari and Tiahuanaco empires are sometimes blamed on invading barbarians. It's the Harappan civilization. Based on the traditions of the Rig Veda, the downfall of the Harappan civilization is frequently attributed to invading Aryans who toppled this urban society by virtue of superior military technology, war chariots. Figgin, Wheeler, Alchin, and to Piggott, the invaders found a society already crumbling. Civilization was already effete and on the wane when raiders came. Effete, I love that word. Literally, it means weak from childbirth. Mesopotamia, less complex societies are frequently implicated in the fall of various Mesopotamian polities, often in Mesopotamian literary accounts. The downfall of Sargon of Akkad, for instance, is attributed to Gutian invaders from the eastern mountains, while the fall of Ur is ascribed to Amorites and Elamites. The Hittite Empire. The collapse of the Hittite Empire circa 1200 BC is frequently seen as the action migratory sea peoples who engulfed the Aegean and the eastern Mediterranean and who were stopped only at the gates of Egypt. Some see the collapse as due to the combination of these invaders and the Hittites' traditional enemies, the barbarian Kaskas. Egyptian records speak of the Hittites as having fallen before such invaders. An inscription of Ramesses III reads in part, the isles were restless, disturbed among themselves. No land stood before their weapons. Various authors assign the Minoan collapse to invading Mycenaean Greeks, themselves only recently recipients of Minoan civilization. Usually some factor is invoked, the eruption of Thera or a great earthquake circa 1500 BC that weakened Cretan power and opened the door to mainland invasion. The destruction of Mycenaean civilization by Dorian Greek invaders is the classic example of an intruder theory and is endorsed by a variety of current scholars, Taylor, Vermeulen, Milonis, Desborough, Stubbings, Chadwick. The role of barbarians in the fall of the Roman Empire has been the subject of debate since the invasions of themselves. It is a topic so well known that there is no need to discuss it in any depth here. And China, the susceptibility of the northern frontier to barbarian incursions is a constant theme of Chinese history and has been well treated by Lattimore. Assessment. Barbarian invasions have a clear attraction to collapse theorists, somewhat like catastrophe explanations. They provide a clean, simple resolution to a distressingly convoluted problem. As a deus ex machina, invasions are an old favorite in archaeological studies where sudden episodes of cultural change might otherwise be difficult to explain. They have a similar attraction in the study of collapse. In some cases, fear of uncivilized people has served to legitimize existing political arrangements as well as taxation, military expenditures, and behavioral regimentation. I'll have more from Tainter's Collapse of Complex Society on Monday. And, oh, yes. Joe Biden. This is epic, says Kane at Citizen Free Press. Joe and Jill Biden get trolled on White House Christmas call, where a prank caller gets Joe to say, "Let's go, Brandon. I agree." He really is gone, isn't he? He really is gone. And there was an earlier story from, CNN, perhaps, that the mainstream media, or the regime media, as I like to call it, is beginning to question Joe Biden's suitability. Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. A CNN correspondent noted how Joe Biden appeared confused throughout an entire interview as he repeatedly mistook COVID home tests for antiviral pills. The comment was made in reference to Biden's 20-minute interview with ABC's David Muir, during which the president attempted to defend his response to the pandemic and complaints that people in New York were waiting in line for 5 hours to receive a COVID test. Biden repeatedly referred to the 500 million at-home tests that had been ordered as pills, confusing them with the new Pfizer drug, which was federally approved on the same day. Repeatedly throughout this interview, President Biden seems confused and was confusing the 500 million tests that they've ordered with 500 million pills, said Jeff Zeleny, CNN's chief national affairs correspondent. Of course, pills were in the news today with the Pfizer approval of the antiviral, so he corrected himself, but that was one thing that stuck out to me, he added. In a rare instance of CNN criticizing Biden, Zeleny accused the president of not accepting any responsibility for the lack of testing. We've seen these images across the country, long lines, just the inability to get tests, said the reporter. And yes, Omicron came on very quickly here, but it's been almost a month since Thanksgiving when they knew this was coming. Well, apparently CNN hasn't got the latest memo that is testing. If all of these people have Omicron, record numbers of new cases, and yet no one is dying, well, then it appears that the panic porn will have to come to an end. David Radler was the name of the fellow who attempted to destroy my career. He was second in command to Conrad Black, and he was smarter than Conrad Black. Conrad Black could have avoided going to prison if he hadn't reneged on the deal that he had made, where there was a fine, or they both agreed to pay a fine of $32 million for the notorious non-compete payments. Radler did. Black didn't. Black went to prison as a result. But Radler, he served 2.5 years in prison, and he also paid close to $100 million in fines and such like. So I suppose it's the curse of grace, one might say. And we're going to move to the Christmas part of the program now. Just let me do one final check with the chat before I move on to a story called The Burglar's Christmas, which was written by the great American novelist Willa Cather under the pseudonym Elizabeth L. Seymour, from the magazine The Home Monthly, December 1896. But first, back to the chat. Emma Kelly's Earth says, thank you, KMG, for keeping us company during the madness of the past 2 years. Merry Christmas. Well, Merry Christmas to you as well. Oscar Toe says, they will just say the Omicron doesn't kill your body, but it scientifically kills your soul, and people will keep masking up and getting boosters. I'm trying to fight levels of contempt for my own family members that I wouldn't have thought possible for this COVID madness, says Mr. Marvel. I really need Christ this Christmas. Texas Feral Hog says, I thought the Anasazi left their cliff dwellings during a long, severe 14th century drought. Well, that's one of the most fascinating things about history, is that, who's to say what's true? There's a great deal of ambiguity. Robert Conquest famously said that something like 50 years after the death of Napoleon, it would be difficult to prove that he had ever existed. Hello to Chad Chadson. A happy Christmas to Chad Chadson, our valiant moderator. Thank you for your service. For instance, the mystery religions of the ancient Greeks, they did a very good job of keeping them a mystery, because to this day, we have very little idea what they were doing with their mystery religions. The cult of Mithras, which became extraordinarily popular in the late Roman period. It's not really a mystery, you know. Roy Campbell, my favorite poet, he wrote a sonnet cycle about the cult of Mithras. It was called Mithraic Emblems. Campbell was a Catholic convert, but he was very attracted to the dynamism and virility of the cult of Mithras. Okay, so let's go to the literature. Again, this is The Burglar's Christmas by Willa Cather. Two very shabby-looking young men stood at the corner of Prairie Avenue and 80th Street, looking despondently at the carriages that whirled by. It was Christmas Eve, and the streets were full of vehicles, florist wagons, grocers' carts, and carriages. The streets were in that half-liquid, half-congealed condition peculiar to the streets of Chicago at that season of the year. The swift wheels that spun by sometimes threw the slush of mud and snow over the two young men who were talking on the corner. "Well," remarked the elder of the two, "I guess we are at our rope's end. Sure enough. How do you feel?" "Pretty shaky. The wind's sharp tonight. If I had anything to eat, I mightn't mind so much. There is simply no show. I'm sick of the whole business. Looks like there's nothing for it but the lake." "Ah, nonsense. I thought you had more grit. Got anything left you can hawk?" "Nothing but my beard, and I'm afraid they wouldn't find it worth a pawn ticket," said the young man ruefully, rubbing the week's growth of stubble on his face. "Got any folks anywhere? Now's your time to strike 'em if you have." "Never mind if I have. They're out of the question." "Well, you'll be out of it before many hours if you don't make a move of some sort. A man's got to eat. See here, I'm going down to Longton's saloon. I used to play the banjo in there with a couple of coons, and I'll bone him for some of his free lunch stuff. You better come along. Perhaps they'll fill out an order or two." "How far down is it?" "Well, it's clear downtown, of course, way down on Michigan Avenue." "Thanks. I guess I'll loaf around here. I don't feel equal to the walk, and the cars are crowded." His features drew themselves into what might have been a smile under happier circumstances. "No, you never did like streetcars. You're too aristocratic. See here, Crawford, I don't like leaving you here. You ain't good company for yourself tonight." "Crawford? Oh, yes, that's the last one. There have been so many, I forget them. Have you got a real name anyway?" "Oh, yes, but it's one of the ones I've forgotten. Don't you worry about me. You go along and get your free lunch. I think I had a row in Longton's place once. I'd better not show myself there again." As he spoke, the young man nodded and turned slowly up the avenue. He was miserable enough to want to be quite alone. Even the crowd that jostled by him annoyed him. He wanted to think about himself. He had avoided this final reckoning with himself for a year now. He had laughed it off and drunk it off. By now, when all those artificial devices which are employed to turn our thoughts into other channels and shield us from ourselves had failed him, it must come. Hunger is a powerful incentive to introspection. It is a tragic hour, that hour when we are finally driven to reckon with ourselves, when every avenue of mental distraction has been cut off, and our own life and all its ineffaceable failures closes about us like the walls of that old torture chamber of the Inquisition. Tonight, as this man stood stranded in the streets of the city, his hour came. It was not the first time he had been hungry and desperate and lone. But always before, there had been some outlook, some chance ahead, some pleasure yet untasted that seemed worth the effort, some face that he fancied was or would be dear. But it was not so tonight. The unyielding conviction was upon him that he had failed in everything, had outlived everything. It had been near him for a long time, that pale specter. He had caught its shadow at the bottom of his glass many a time, at the head of his bed when he was sleepless at night, in the twilight shadows when some great sunset broke upon him. It had made life hateful to him when he awoke in the morning before now. But now it settled slowly over him like night, like the endless northern nights that bid the sun a long farewell. It rose up before him like granite. From this brilliant city with its glad bustle of Yuletide, he was shut off as completely as though he were a creature of another species. His days seemed numbered and done, sealed over like the little coral cells at the bottom of the sea. Involuntarily, he drew that cold air through his lungs slowly, as though he were tasting it for the last time. Yet he was but 24, this man. He looked even younger, and he had a father someplace down east who had been very proud of him once. Well, he had taken his life into his own hands, and this is what he had made of it. That was all there was to be said. He could remember the hopeful things they used to say about him at college in the old days, before he had cut away and begun to live by his wits, and he found courage to smile at them now. They had read him wrongly. He knew now that he had never had the essentials of success, only the superficial agility that is often mistaken for it. He was tow without the tinder, and he had burnt himself out at other people's fires. He had helped other people to make it win, but he had never touched an enterprise that had not failed eventually. Or, if it survived his connection with it, it left him behind. His last venture had been with some 10-cent specialty company, a little lower than all the others, that had gone to pieces in Buffalo, and he had worked his way to Chicago by boat. When the boat made up its crew for the outward voyage, he was dispensed with as usual. He was used to that. The reason for it? Oh, there are so many reasons for failure. His was a very common one. As he stood there in the wet under the streetlight, he drew up his reckoning with the world and decided that it had treated him as well as he deserved. He had overdrawn his account once too often. There had been a day when he thought otherwise, when he had said that he was unjustly handled, that his failure was merely the lack of proper adjustment between himself and other men, that someday he would be recognized and it would all come right. But he knew better than that now, and he was still man enough to bear no grudge against anyone, man or woman. Tonight was his birthday, too. There seemed something particularly amusing in that. He turned up a limp little coat collar to try to keep a little of the wet chill from his throat, and instinctively began to remember all the birthday parties he used to have. He was so cold and empty that his mind seemed unable to grapple with any serious question. He kept thinking about gingerbread and frosted cakes like a child. He could remember the splendid birthday parties his mother used to give him, when all the other little boys in the block came in their Sunday clothes and creaking shoes, with their ears still red from their mother's towel, and the pink and white birthday cake, and the stuffed olives, and all the dishes of which he had been particularly fond, and how he would eat and then go to bed and dream of Santa Claus. And in the morning he would awaken and eat again until by night the family doctor arrived with his castor oil, and poor William used to dolefully say that it was altogether too much to have your birthday and Christmas all at once. He could remember, too, the royal birthday suppers he had given at college, and the stag dinners, and the toasts, and the music, and the good fellows who had wished him happiness and really meant what they said. And since then there were other birthday suppers that he could not remember so clearly, the memory of them was heavy and flat, like cigarette smoke that has been shut in a room all night, like champagne that has been a day opened, a song that has been too often sung, an acute sensation that has been overstrained. They seemed tawdry and garish, discordant to him now. He rather wished he could forget them altogether. Whichever way his mind now turned, there was one thought that it could not escape, and that was the idea of food. He caught the scent of a cigar suddenly and felt a sharp pain in the pit of his abdomen and a sudden moisture in his mouth. His cold hands clenched angrily, and for a moment he felt that bitter hatred of wealth, of ease, of everything that is well-fed and well-housed that is common to starving men. At any rate, he had a right to eat. He had demanded great things from the world once, fame and wealth and admiration. Now it was simply bread, and he would have it. He looked around him quickly and felt the blood begin to stir in his veins. In all his straits, he had never stolen anything. His tastes were above it. But tonight there would be no tomorrow. He was amused at the way in which the idea excited him. Was it possible there was yet one more experience that would distract him, one thing that had power to excite his jaded interest? Good. He had failed at everything else. Now he would see what his chances would be as a common thief. It would be amusing to watch the beautiful consistency of his destiny work itself out, even in that role. It would be interesting to add another study to his gallery of futile attempts and then label them all the failure as a journalist, the failure as a lecturer, the failure as a businessman, the failure as a thief, and so on, like the titles under the pictures of The Dance of Death. It was time that a child Roland came to the Dark Tower. A girl hastened by him with her arms full of packages. She walked quickly and nervously, keeping well within the shadow, as if she were not accustomed to carrying bundles and did not care to meet any of her friends. As she crossed the muddy street, she made an effort to lift her skirt a little, and as she did so, one of the packages slipped unnoticed from beneath her. He caught it up and overtook her. "Excuse me, but I think you dropped something." She started. "Oh, yes, thank you. I would rather have lost anything than that." The young man turned angrily upon himself. The package must have contained something of value. Why had he not kept it? Was this the sort of thief he would make? He ground his teeth together. There is nothing more maddening than to have morally consented to crime and then lack the nerve force to carry it out. A carriage drove up to the house before which he stood. Several richly dressed women alighted and went in. It was a new house and must have been built since he was in Chicago last. The front door was open, and he could see down the hallway and up the staircase. The servant had left the door and gone with the guests. The first floor was brilliantly lighted, but the windows upstairs were dark. It looked very easy just to slip upstairs to the darkened chambers where the jewels and trinkets of the fashionable occupants were kept. Still burning with impatience against himself, he entered quickly. Instinctively, he removed his mud-stained hat as he passed quickly and quietly up the staircase. It struck him as being a rather superfluous courtesy in a burglar, but he had done it before he had thought. His way was clear enough. He met no one on the stairway or in the upper hall. The gas was lit in the upper hall. He passed the first chamber door through sheer cowardice. The second he entered quickly, thinking of something else, lest his courage should fail him, and closed the door behind him. The light from the hall shone into the room through the transom. The apartment was furnished richly enough to justify his expectations. He went at once to the dressing case. A number of rings and small trinkets lay in a silver tray. These he put hastily in his pocket. He opened the upper drawer and found, as he expected, several leather cases. In the first he opened was a lady's watch. In the second, a pair of old-fashioned bracelets. He seemed to dimly remember having seen bracelets like them before, somewhere. The third case was heavier. The spring was much worn, and it opened easily. It held a cup of some kind. He held it up to the light, and then his strained nerves gave way, and he uttered a sharp exclamation. It was the silver mug he used to drink from when he was a little boy. The door opened, and a woman stood in the doorway facing him. She was a tall woman with white hair in evening dress. The light from the hall streamed in upon him, but she was not afraid. She stood looking at him a moment, then she threw out her hand and quickly went toward him. Willie, is it you?" He struggled to loose her arms from him to keep his lips from his cheek. "Mother, you must not. You do not understand. Oh, my God, this is worst of all." Hunger, weakness, cold, shame all came back to him and shook his self-control completely. Physically, he was too weak to stand a shock like this. Why could it not have been an ordinary discovery, arrest, the station house, and all the rest of it? Anything but this. A hard, dry sob broke from him. Again, he strove to disengage himself. "Who is it says I shall not kiss my son? Oh, my boy, we have waited so long for this. You have been so long in coming. Even I almost gave you up." Her lips upon his cheek burnt him like fire. He put his hand to his throat and spoke thickly and incoherently. "You do not understand. I do not know you were here. I came to rob. It is the first time, I swear, but I am a common thief. My pockets are full of your jewels now. Can't you hear me? I am a common thief." "Hush, my boy, those are ugly words. How could you rob your own house? How could you take what is your own? They are all yours, my son, as wholly yours as my great love, and you can't doubt that. Will, do you?" That soft voice, the warmth and fragrance of her person, stole through his chill, empty veins like a gentle stimulant. He felt as though all his strength were leaving him, and even consciousness. He held fast to her and bowed his head on her strong shoulder and groaned aloud. "Oh, mother, life is hard, hard." She said nothing but held him closer. And oh, the strength of those white arms that held him. Oh, the assurance of safety in that warm bosom that rose and fell under his cheek. For a moment, they stood so silently. Then they heard a heavy step upon the stair. She led him to a chair and went out and closed the door. At the top of the staircase, she met a tall, broad-shouldered man with iron gray hair and a face alert and stern. His eyes were shining and her cheeks were on fire. Her whole face was one expression of intense determination. James, it is William in there. Come home. You must keep him at any cost. If he goes this time, I go with him. Oh, James, be easy with him. He has suffered so. She broke from a command to an entreaty and laid her hand on his shoulder. He looked questioningly at her a moment, then went into the room and quietly shut the door. She stood leaning against the wall, clasping her temples with her hands and listening to the low, indistinct sound of the voices within. Her own lips moved silently. She waited a long time, scarcely breathing. At last the door opened and her husband came out. He stopped to say in a shaken voice, "You go to him now. He will stay. I will go to my room. I will see him again in the morning." She put her arm about his neck. "Oh, James, I thank you. I thank you. This is the night he came so long ago. You remember? I gave him to you then, and now you give him back to me." "Don't, Helen," he muttered. "He is my son. I have never forgotten that. I failed with him. I don't like to fail. It cuts my pride. Take him and make a man of him." He passed on down the hall. She flew into the room where the young man sat with his head bowed upon his knee. She dropped upon her knees beside him. Ah, it was so good to feel those arms again. "He is so glad, Willie, so glad. He may not show it, but he is as happy as I. He was never demonstrative with either of us, you know." "Oh, my God, he was good enough," groaned the man. "I told him everything, and he was good enough. I don't see how either of you can look at me, speak to me, touch me." He shivered under her clasp again, as when she had first touched him, and tried weakly to throw her off. But she whispered softly, "This is my right, my son." Presently, when he was calmer, she rose. "Now come with me into the library, and I will have your dinner brought there." As they went downstairs, she remarked apologetically, "I will not call Ellen tonight. She has a number of guests to attend to. She is a big girl now, you know, and came out last winter. Besides, I want you all to myself tonight." When the dinner came, and it came very soon, he fell upon it savagely. As he ate, she told him all that had transpired during the years of his absence and how his father's business had brought him there. "I was glad when we came. I thought you would drift west. I seemed a good deal nearer to you here." There was a gentle, unobtrusive sadness in her tone that was too soft for a reproach. "Have you everything you want? It is a comfort to see you eat." He smiled grimly. "It certainly is a comfort for me. I have not indulged in this frivolous habit for some 35 hours. She caught his hand and pressed it sharply, uttering a quick remonstrance. "Don't say that. I know, but I can't hear you say it. It's too terrible. My boy, food has choked me many a time when I have thought of the possibility of that. Now take the old lounging chair by the fire, and if you're too tired to walk, we will just sit and rest together." He sank into the depths of the big leather chair with the lions' heads on the arms, where he had sat so often in the days when his feet did not touch the floor, and he was half afraid of the grim monsters cut into the polished wood. That chair seemed to speak to him of things long forgotten. It was like the touch of an old familiar friend. He felt a sudden yearning tenderness for the happy little boy who had sat there and dreamed of the big world so long ago. Alas, he had been dead many a summer, that little boy. He was looking up at the magnificent woman beside him. He had almost forgotten how handsome she was, how lustrous and sad were the eyes that were set under that serene brow, how impetuous and wayward the mouth even now, how superb the white throat and shoulders. Ah, the wit and grace and fineness of this woman. He remembered how proud he had been of her as a boy when she came to see him at school. Then, in the deep red coals of the grate, he saw the faces of other women who had since come into his vexed, disordered life. Laughing faces with eyes artificially bright, eyes without depth or meaning, features without the stamp of high sensibilities. And he had left this face for such as those. He sighed restlessly and laid his hand on hers. There seemed refuge and protection in the touch of her, as in the old days when he was afraid of the dark. He had been in the dark so long now, his confidence was so thoroughly shaken, and he was bitterly afraid of the night and of himself. Ah, mother, you make other things seem so false. You must feel that I owe you an explanation, but I can't make any, even to myself. Ah, but we make poor exchanges in this life. I can't make out the riddle of it all. Yet there are things I ought to tell you before I accept your confidence like this. I'd rather you wouldn't, Will. Listen, between you and me, there can be no secrets. We are more alike than other people. Dear boy, I know all about it. I am a woman, and circumstances were different with me, but we are of one blood. I have lived all your life before you. You have never had an impulse that I have not known. You have never touched a brink that my feet have not trod. This is your birthday night. 24 years ago, I foresaw all this. I was a young woman then, and I had hot battles of my own, and I felt your likeness to me. You were not like other babies. From the hour you were born, you were restless and discontented, as I had been before you. You used to brace your strong little limbs against mine and try to throw me off, as you did tonight. Tonight you have come back to me, just as you always did after you ran away to swim in the river that was forbidden you, the river you loved because it was forbidden. You were tired and sleepy, just as you used to be then, only a little older and a little paler and a little more foolish. I never asked you where you had been, nor will I now. You have come back to me. That's all in all to me. I know your every possibility and limitation as a composer knows his instrument. He found no answer that was worthy to give to talk like this. He had not found life easy since he had lived by his wits. He had come to know poverty at close quarters. He had known what it was to be gay with an empty pocket, to wear violets in his buttonhole when he had not breakfasted, and all the hateful shams of the poverty of idleness. He had been a reporter on a big metropolitan daily where men grind out their brains on paper until they have not one idea left and then still grind on. He had worked in a real estate office where ignorant men were swindled. He had sung in a comic opera chorus and played Harris in an Uncle Tom's Cabin Company and edited a socialist weekly. He had been dogged by debt and hunger and grinding poverty until to sit here by a warm fire without concern as to how it would be paid for seemed unnatural. He looked at her questioningly. I wonder if you know how much you pardon. Oh, my poor boy, much or little, what does it matter? Have you wandered so far and paid such a bitter price for knowledge, and not yet learned that love has nothing to do with pardon or forgiveness, that it only loves and loves and loves? Then they have not taught you well, the women of your world. She leaned over and kissed him as no woman had kissed him since he left her. He drew a long sigh of rich content. The old life, with all its bitterness and useless antagonism and flimsy sophistries, its brief delights that were always tinged with fear and distrust and unfaith, that whole miserable, futile, swindled world of Bohemia seemed immeasurably distant and far away, like a dream that is over and done. And as the chimes rang joyfully outside and sleep pressed heavily upon his eyelids, he wondered dimly if the author of this sad little riddle of ours were not able to solve it after all, and if the potter would not finally mete out all his comprehensive justice, such as none but he could have, to his things of clay, which are made in his own patterns, weak or strong for his own ends, and if some day we will not awaken and find that all evil is a dream, a mental distortion that will pass when the dawn shall break. And that was the Burglar's Christmas from Willa Cather, which was written under the pseudonym Elizabeth L. Seymour in 1896. Let's see. Anything in the chat? Lovely story for our times, Kevin, says Teleologic Jones. Well, thank you. Thank you. Willa Cather. Willa Cather was, one of the greatest American authors. She was exceedingly popular in the first 30, 40 years of the 20th century. She was world famous. She fell into, how would I say, popular or critical disapproval. It's hard to judge why these things happen. Now, of course, she is acclaimed as a lesbian, though in fact there is no evidence of this. I mean, she was a woman who never married. That used to be fairly common. But now that, a label can be placed on her, a fashionable label, perhaps she'll become popular again. Hello to Metal Mike. Just wrapped up Christmas Eve festivities, he says. Merry Christmas. Your mama says Christ is born. Glorify him. And we got a couple of minutes left. I had some poems picked out. This is one of my favorite poems by Hilaire Belloc. It was set to music so very memorably by Peter Warlock, that poor man. This is called The Birds. When Jesus Christ was 4 years old, the angels brought him toys of gold, which no man ever had bought or sold. And yet with these he would not play. He made him small fowl out of clay, and blessed them till they flew away to Creaste Domine. Jesus Christ, though child so wise, bless mine hands and fill mine eyes, and bring my soul to paradise. Of course, Belloc was a famously combative man. Old Thunder, they called him. And here's a very short poem that he wrote, giving vent to that side of him. It's called Lines for a Christmas Card. May all my enemies go to hell. Noel, 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 Noel. I know a lot of Catholics are scandalized by Hilaire Belloc because he was a manly man. And apparently Catholics are not supposed to be manly men anymore. So on that note, I think I'm going to wrap things up. Once again, thank you all so much for your support this year. And I'll just mention, in case you missed it earlier, that the lawyers have finally managed to give me a portion of my father's estate, which means I don't have to live in a constant apprehension of being homeless. A happy Christmas to you all. I will be back on the air on Monday, December the 27th. God bless you, and I wish you all a happy Christmas. And as always, I leave you with this benediction in these days of social atomization and a civilizational collapse. I duly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.